It's a production of WTVI PBS Charlotte.
Charlotte City Council adopts a stricter ethics code, controversy over a bill giving magistrates the choice to perform same-sex marriages, and the state Supreme Court decides the future of private school vouchers. Those topics and more on this edition of Off the Record. Good evening, I'm Jeff Rivenbark. Thanks for joining us. My guests this week are Tom Bullock with WFAE, Glen Burkins with Q City Metro, Erik Spanberg with the Charlotte Business Journal, and B. Thompson with WBAV. Thanks for braving the cold to be with us again. This week, Charlotte City Council approved a new ethics code addressing what types of gifts council members can accept and the relationships they have to disclose. This action coming a year after former Mayor Patrick Cannon was convicted for using his position for personal gain. Those acts were already against council policy and illegal under federal law. So the question I have for you is, does City Council get a thumbs up for having this new action?
Does it go kind of sideways? They finally did something, so that's better than nothing, but we're probably not all the way there. It's hard to believe that it's gone this long, sort of unchecked, unnoticed, but this is progress of a kind, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's, I mean, the basic things that were laid out were like no gifts over $50. You can accept a gift if it is something the city would reimburse you for anyway, which is a whole other issue for the city these days. And you can still accept tickets to sporting events if you're going to be there for official business. I think it's a start. You know, I think they actually, before they told you what you couldn't receive, now they tell you what you can receive. You know, this day and age, especially after Patrick Cannon, why not? I think it's good that they at least brought it up.
You've got to have some type of clarity there. I think general public might say, well, you know, common sense would tell you don't take that. But that doesn't always count when you factor in other things like, well, this isn't really influencing me. That would make a difference to me, so why couldn't I? Now with some type of clarity, you cannot say you did not know or no one explained that this didn't fall under those guidelines. I thought it was very interesting talking about tickets to events. And Councilmember LaWanna Mayfield made a very good point about, well, does that mean only those who can really afford to do this can do it? Well, don't do business at sporting events. Make sure you do it at a council event.
Which was Kenny Smith's point.
Yeah,
I think you're right that it's good they have it, and it robs elected officials of the possibility of saying I didn't know. But at the end of the day, ethics is it's a personal decision, and as you pointed out correctly at the beginning, all of the things that Patrick Cannon did, was convicted of, was illegal. I think it's a feel-good measure at the end of the day. We've got to have it, but it's not going to stop someone who is intent on doing something wrong.
We can revise the list, though. We can say don't create fictional companies, don't accept trips to Las Vegas.
Exactly.
Use of a luxury apartment in South Park, that's wrong.
Anything else that comes up like that, Glen is correct. I think people run on being moral and I'll be good for the community and everything, and when it comes down to something like this, you find out just what type of moral character someone has and whether or not they will cross a line. So now that little line is there. You're supposed to be on this side. If you start leaning to that side, you're going to get tapped.
And I do think, though, that these are complicated issues in a way. I mean, yes, there are basic ethics and people have to do the right thing, but it can get too sort of nitpicky, when can you go to a movie, but you can't go to a sporting event. So they've kind of worked their way around some of those by saying, yes, tickets are okay. But as Tom mentioned, we have this whole issue with travel expenses just in the same week. So I think it's always going to be a point of contention and a point of scrutiny.
But I think that the standard is simple, and I think, B, you're exactly right. The standard still is what a reasonable person would decide is an appropriate gift and not a measure of trying to gain influence. The problem is when did politicians stop thinking like reasonable people? In some of these situations, they go right up to that line.
It was probably in Athens, Greece, around what year would that
right. And I think part of it is this. If you can't tell when you should take it or shouldn't take it, how you doing? Really, we could. And at that point, you need to start backing away.
Because it's probably wrong.
It's probably wrong when somebody is approaching you with something going, well, we can make that happen for you. No. That's wrong.
But what is sort of comical about this, yes, it's important, and yes, we need to take steps. Remember, we're talking about an industry where people take money from other people to
the whole
go to
thing
office,
is based
but then
on,
they say, hey, that's not going to influence me that you gave me a bunch of money.
That's a good point.
Well, in the week ahead, Charlotte Council is expected to vote on a protection ordinance for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. City Council discussed it this week. Basically, a restaurant owner would have to serve a gay couple, or a business couldn't refuse to serve a transgender customer. But there's quite a bit of tension over the issue of allowing transgender people to use the restroom of their choice. One city councilman suggested that male pedophiles and perverts might abuse the bathroom policy. Tom, I know WFAE has been covering this quite a bit. They spoke with Scott Bishop, who is the chairman of the Charlotte LGBT Political Action Committee. He calls the councilman's reasoning, quote, an unfounded fear tactic. What are your thoughts on that?
I think he has a point. I mean, the council member that we're talking about is Kenny Smith again. And I think Kenny Smith is, I think he's a good person. I think he was, frankly, being rather brave by bringing up his concerns about restrooms and saying it publicly on the record when, in fact, many people are just going to be saying it behind closed doors or to their close friends. But Mr. Bishop from the LGBT, the advocate, is right. There are 17 states in the country that have these kinds of provisions, and there has not been any kind of statistical jump of any kind of child predatory situation. I honestly, I think it's smarter to be more concerned about the sanitary situation in that bathroom than necessarily whether or not an LGBT member or a transgender person is going to be in there. It just doesn't make sense to me.
And more to the point, who's monitoring these restrooms now to ensure that some guy doesn't put on a wig and go in? Nothing is going to really change in that way. If a transgender, I'm sure we have transgender people now going into various restrooms. And nothing is going to really change.
It's interesting. Someone was asking me, well, Democrats have a 9-2 advantage, so does it just fall along party lines? It doesn't. Michael Barnes, who is the mayor pro tem, is very much with Kenny Smith on this. David Howard has kind of been on the fence. He hasn't decided. So I think that the vote might surprise a few people. But, of course, we're going to have a marathon, and I mean marathon, citizen outcry first. I think we have 60, 70 speakers signed up for Monday night.
Well, let me bring you an update from the beauty shop. The ladies were discussing this very issue. The concern for a lot of these ladies was, I don't know if I want... If you come in the bathroom and you look like a man to me, I'm going to tell you to leave. Now, that may sound crazy, but that's rank and file people saying how they feel about it. And these were ladies, older ladies, younger women who were simply saying, I don't know about that. I don't know if I'm comfortable with something like that. And one lady said, don't they have family bathrooms? Couldn't they go in a family bathroom? I'm like, that's an option. But every business doesn't have a family
and
restaurant.
You will have an outcry from businesses about the expense.
About having to put in another one. So I don't know. When you come down to individual preferences, and I know that's something else that we'll be talking about, will it make somebody else leave a bathroom? In some cases, you may find that. But if it is the law of what our community is about, and once you've talked about it, I don't know that you can oppose it, but you may have a lot of folk holding water till they go home.
And I understand why individuals might feel that way. But my point is that unbeknownst to them, some of those women have probably been in bathrooms already with transgender people and just simply didn't know it.
Probably have.
We're talking about, I mean, you mentioned law, but then there's the whole fuzziness of, what kind of teeth does this even have as the city approves it? And I had a couple council people tell me this week, as they were bemoaning what they know will be a lengthy Monday night, say that they may not necessarily vote after all this goes on, or they may not necessarily vote on Monday night. So
it's kicking the can down the road.
And I personally, as a resident of Charlotte, I personally would be disappointed in that, because the whole point is make a decision.
Yeah.
And I understand both sides to this. I understand if some people are queasy, some people may be this, but let's not forget that that is the same argument that has been used time and again in what can easily be boiled down to as some form of discrimination. There is a simple fact that it is safe. It's not going to tear the fabric of space-time. It is not something that is going to dramatically change anyone's life. If it is your personal choice, you have every right to feel the way you feel and to act accordingly. But that doesn't mean that as a society, we should be setting up this kind of tiered system.
Right. Because 60, 70, 80 years ago, Tom, people were saying that about water fountains and races.
Absolutely.
So,
exactly.
It is quickly a slippery slope.
Yeah. But what you have is a lot of laws have been based on how people feel religiously. Even though we're a nation that's supposed to have a separation of church and state, the lines bleed over. And a lot of people base their opinion upon what their religious belief is. And for some folks, it's like, if you were born a man, you're supposed to stay a man. That's not necessarily right for someone who is in a situation where nature and nurture are all however way you want to describe it. But how do you protect an individual's rights? And I think you have to protect rights, but what's that line about your rights end where my rights begin? So how do you resolve that one? But we are wrapped up in how people feel religiously, and then they look at what you should do legally.
And I think there is also the personal safety issue. I don't dismiss the people in your beauty shop and how they feel. I really don't. I just don't think in 2 years, 3 years, this is going to be an issue. I'm just not seeing a sea change in Charlotte with millions of transgender people running into women's restrooms.
Well, and look at some of the statistics that you were just citing in, 17 states?
17 states, more than 200 municipalities. It's more, to me, it seems more of a fear of the unknown, a fear of the different, a fear of the strange, not a fear that's necessarily based in empirical fact. Right. Now, I also am not dismissing any of that. I understand those fears, and they have a right to them. They have an absolute right to believe what they believe. But I would hope, frankly, that the city, which has a higher responsibility than an individual, would stop to think about that empirical side as well, and not just a personal fear factor, which is valid, but shouldn't be the shouldn't be the cornerstone of law.
Well, I want to move now to Raleigh. The North Carolina Senate voted Wednesday to allow magistrates and Register of Deeds staffers to recuse themselves from performing marriage ceremonies.
Yeah, exactly.
if they oppose if they oppose same-sex marriages. Supporters of the bill saying it's necessary to protect First Amendment rights, guaranteeing freedom of religion. However, opponents claiming the bill creates discrimination. A Raleigh Democrat said the bill takes us down a road we must not go. So, what is he alluding to?
I think that one is exactly what I'm talking about when you talk about the separation of church and state. But in this case, if this is a law, your personal opinion should not be able to stop somebody from doing something.
Unless you live in Alabama.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
But, there were a lot of cases during civil rights movement where folks said, no, this shouldn't happen, we don't want this to happen. I am sure there were some National Guard members who did not want to be at Little Rock to ensure that those children's rights were protected, but it was a law. And so that's what they did. This one makes me wonder if you do start saying, well, your religious beliefs say you don't have to do this and we'll give you an out. You're crossing that line again. You got to keep that separate.
This is the most phenomenally bad idea I've heard in a long time.
That's a good
And aside
description.
from politics, there's no other way to describe it. It is a slippery slope. You could have someone in DSS saying, I don't believe in interracial adoption, so I'm not going to perform those. You might even have someone in the Department of Revenue who has moral or religious grounds against collecting taxes. I talked with a friend just yesterday, as a matter of fact. We were talking about this very thing, and he mentioned a cousin who gave up a job at a supermarket because she didn't want to ring up beer and wine sales. I respect her religious convictions, but at the end of the day, beer and wine sales are legal. And so she did the right thing of taking herself out of that situation.
Which is the answer to the magistrates who don't feel like they can do this. That's fine, but you're going to have to do something else.
Yeah,
it's not a part-time job where you just sort of self-select.
And the other thing, too, is that if they decide, okay, this is against my religious convictions, they will not be performing those marriages for 6 months at a time.
Right.
So it's like, who else is doing all the work in that office?
Correct.
But here's the thing. Let's also remember, we're talking about religious conviction, but we're not talking about clergy. We're talking about a state employee who has taken an oath. And I think one of the most pertinent takes on this whole situation was actually from a Republican, Senator Jeff Tart, when he came out and said, I'm going to struggle over this. He actually was one of 2 Republicans to vote against this measure, and he said, at the end of the day, it comes down to the fact that they took an oath, and it's no different than a member of a jury who has taken an oath to uphold a law, whether they agree with that law or not. And those magistrates have a decision to make. Are you a member of the state, or are you an individual? And if you're not willing to perform what is inherently law, then I agree. I'm not sure that you should be in that position. I mean, the state has every right to pursue this matter legally through the channels of appeal, and they're doing that, and they're doing it vigorously. But when it is the law of the land, which it is right now, then they shouldn't be making these carve-outs. I mean, as you were talking about, what about, where's the carve-out for a poll worker who disagrees with voter ID laws? Where's
Right.
I mean, this is a really tricky thing, and it seems to forget the fact that as a state employee, you are there to serve the state and the people of the state, not your own personal
Well,
convictions.
let's just for a minute, let me interrupt the debate about whether the magistrate should be there or not. And let's recall that our beloved General Assembly went into session promising to focus on jobs, and more jobs, and not get distracted by social issues. And here we are, right out of the chute.
Does anybody else see the fact that more and more of the issues that are going before the court are a separation of church and state? There's an underlying pool in all these cases that are coming up. And I don't know if there's also an undertone of people thinking about, I'm a Christian. I'm not one of those people over there. I'm not one of those people over there. I'm a Christian, and this country was based on Christianity, and da-da-da-da-da. We are going to have to deal with that and point out to people, once again, there is a separation of church and state. You can do what you want to do with your church, but you cannot have your church running the state.
Well, and you can't have the state interfering in your church.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and I think, there's a common thread through all these. That is exactly it. And also people dealing with change and difference. I mean, people just generally don't do well with that.
But it falls. What concerns me about this whole situation is, again, we seem to be willing, or at least legislators may seem to be willing, to set up what is in essence a de facto tiered society. Now, if we really are this paragon of freedom, if we really are a country that is inclusive and tolerant and willing to allow individual opinions on equal grounds, then we can't set up a tiered system of citizenship. It doesn't work. We've done it in the past, and it is problematic.
And although this particular bill was started over the issue of same-sex marriage, there is nothing to say that a magistrate could not object to an interracial marriage or an interfaith marriage or whatever.
So then do you have a loan officer who says, you know what, we need to go back to redlining? I mean, it goes on and on.
It's putting too much power in the hands of someone who is not a decision maker for the people.
And it's ignoring, again, an oath.
Bad
you take
idea.
an oath, you should live up to that oath.
And I want to say one more time, Senator Jeff Tart, he's a Cornelius Republican. He broke with his party in order to oppose this. And I think that says volumes about, the mission of what you need to do when you're in that office, separating your religious beliefs and trying to do the right thing for the people. Another big topic in Raleigh also this week, the Opportunity Scholarship Program. It pays about $4,200, mostly to religious schools, for about 1,200 low-income students statewide. This year alone, the program has paid out about $4 million in private school tuition. This week, the state Supreme Court heard arguments from plaintiffs who were mostly organized by the North Carolina Association of Educators and the North Carolina School Boards Association. Lawyer Burton Craig telling justices the vouchers violate the state constitution, and he said, quote, any money that is going to be sent for the purpose of education, meaning K through 12 education, must be used exclusively to support the free public schools. So is this program siphoning taxpayer dollars from public schools, and should it be pulled? Should we pull the plug on it?
Well, I think this comes down to the essential argument that we're having, or one of the essential arguments we're having about education in this state. And it tends to break down, as usual, along party lines. And Republicans like the idea of public funding for charter schools, and Democrats say exactly what you just said, that it is taking resources and money away from the public school system and essentially creating a private school without it technically being a private school.
No. You should not take public money to go for a private education. And I'll give you myself as an example. I am a product of public schools in Charlotte, Mecklenburg. Would not have changed it for anything in the world. I can understand some people who don't like it. I wanted my daughter to start out in a private school. And she did for a part of elementary. But that meant I was working like 24/7 to pay for it because that was a decision I made. Public dollars should go for public education because that's the whole reason behind it. We're looking at our schools publicly who are losing employees. We don't have the resources. When you've got educators using their money to buy supplies for their classroom, there's something wrong with that. So I don't think we should be subsidizing a private education for someone. If that's what you want to do, more power to you. But you pay for it. Don't expect the public to subsidize it.
The other thing as well is that this entire argument belies a much bigger debate that's going on. Let's just call it what it is. This is an attack on public schools, and it's not just happening in North Carolina, it's happening nationally. There is a certain sector of our population that does not believe the government should be in the business of education. And the whole voucher thing is just a camel's nose under the tent. We're starting with providing vouchers to poor and minority kids who might not be able to afford to get out of some schools, and that sounds really great. You know, who could oppose that? But watch what comes next after that. You'll see mission creep. You'll see those vouchers starting to go to middle class people and then everyone. And I don't think there's any secret that there's a certain segment of our community that would like to see government out of public education.
I hate to sound like the numbers guy today, but apparently it's my job here too. I think you're right, but I do think that there are some empirical things. There is no doubt that this is siphoning money from public schools. That's where the pot is. I mean, there's only so much money in the pot, and it's being siphoned away. There also is no doubt, though, that some public schools, especially in poor areas, have abysmal track records. And what you find is a lot of parents who are kind of stuck in this middle ground. They're like you. They want to know, what can I do to better my child? What can I do to give that my beloved child whatever they need to get a heads up? The voucher system is kind of set up as they can go to public school, which has this kind of ring to it, this wonderful sound. But there are a couple of key points in the legal arguments that I think are really interesting. Point number one, that the public schools are not, or the private schools rather, are not regulated the same way that public schools are. So you don't necessarily have standardized curricula, standardized teacher qualifications. You don't necessarily have those kinds of metrics that allow people to actually measure whether or not these schools are living up to the promise that they have. And you actually heard Justice Newby bring this up, but they do have a standardized test at the end of the year. So you could kind of argue that. But there are two particular words in the North Carolina State Constitution that I think are really interesting. It's Article 9, if you want to look it up, Section 6. And it talks about the fact that all the tax money for public schools has to go exclusively to a uniform system of public schools. Exclusively and uniform are the 2 points of contention here. Exclusively, I would argue probably not. It matters, again, legal definitions are wonderfully flexible things. But a uniform system, that seems to be the strongest argument, in my opinion, that the anti-voucher system has, because these schools don't have a uniform system as normally defined.
Can we also point out that we've already seen several charter schools go under?
Well, there was one that had $14 in the account.
And see, what bothers
they were
me is
so
what happens with that public money that was given to you, and you said this is what you were going to do, and you don't last a year, or you don't last 2 years, or you don't tell parents who want you have them thinking, oh, I can get this money and my child can go to private school. That's $2,000. The school is $10,000 a year. Where's your other $8,000 coming from? So I think you're setting some parents up for a big fall.
Not
when
only
it's
that,
not
remember,
clear.
Jeff, you brought up a few weeks ago, one of our topics was the grading of schools and their performance. Well, for public schools that are struggling and suffering, they come one, come all. Charter school, of course, you again self-select and you take who you want, you get rid of who you don't, and so it's much easier. The bar is much lower to say, hey, look, everything works here because we've picked who we want.
And going off of what Glenn said too, think about all the time and energy and creative thought that has gone into these voucher programs. I wonder, a hypothetical here, what would have happened if we put that same energy and attention into trying to fix the public schools in these areas to give parents a better chance for their children where their schools are.
And therein lies the hypocrisy.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, on a lighter note, Governor Pat McCrory and Quail Hollow Club President Johnny Harris making a big announcement this week. The 2021 President's Cup is coming right here to Charlotte. For the last 20 years, Harris has been trying to land this event, which features top players from the U.S. and overseas. Erik, I know you've been following this quite a bit. This is a pretty big deal for Charlotte.
Yeah, Johnny Harris, who runs Quail Hollow Club, his father started. They have been trying to get major golf events. Obviously, it started with the tournament that came in 2003, the Wells Fargo Championship. They added the PGA Championship, which is coming in 2017, and now this one will be here in 2021. And it's a competition between the top U.S. golfers and non-European international golfers. So it will be a big deal, and I think it's beginning to show that Charlotte is kind of on the radar, is going to become part of the rotation of more high-profile golf events.
And just to give people an idea, right now with the Quail Hollow, they have maybe about, 35,000 people?
Right.
So with this new event, how many people?
Yeah, so 35,000 a day typically come to the Wells Fargo Championship. They'll bump that up to 60,000 for the PGA Championship a day, and then there'll probably be around 45,000 a day for the President's Cup. So you're talking about a lot of people over the course of a week.
Oh,
But
there
the big
will be
question-
mansions rented out for
Yeah.
that week in South Charlotte.
But the big question, will Tiger have his golf game back by then?
Yeah,
That's
that's
right.
true. Will
Yeah.
Tiger be here? And Phil Mickelson's 43, 44, so we might have some different faces on the U.S. team by the time they get here.
And that's why I'm working on my short game.
See, there we go.
And they're going to hire Clemson to come play Hold That Tiger.
All right, on that note, that's all the time we have this week. Tom Bullock with WFAE, Glen Burkins with Q City Metro, Erik Spanberg with the Charlotte Business Journal, and B. Thompson with WBAV. Thank you for being here. Be sure to friend us on Facebook at WTVI Charlotte for a chance to win monthly prizes. I'm Jeff Rivenbark from the crew and everyone else here. Thank you for watching, and stay warm this weekend.
Production of WTVI PBS Charlotte.